Welcome to the Red Rain Podcast. Here is your host from Revenge of the Birds, Walter Mitchell.
Thank you, Kyle. Little Rock Ledbetter. If you would, my friend, as we always do on draft week, is cue up that NFL "The Pick Is In" jingle. Because we're going to use it later.
I always have it ready and on hand for the podcast.
Chime in with it now. Yeah, the pick is in. Pick number 4. It's quite the mystery. Got some thoughts about it. My biggest question is, who actually is going to make that pick? Is it Michael Bidwill, who said to Terry McDonough's lawyer that he is heavily involved in the personnel decisions, which isn't surprising because, well, we know from past experiences. I don't think it's throughout the whole draft, because I remember when the Cardinals were on the clock and it just missed out on Abdullah, the running back for Nebraska, and Steve Keim was explaining to Michael Bidwill who David Johnson was. So I don't think Bidwill maybe goes throughout the whole draft making decisions, but he certainly has been influential at the top, most notably with Kyler Murray, because we know that Bidwill, I think had Murray in mind when he called Ernie DeCourcy, the quarterback guy, quote unquote, to ask him about Murray and then what coach he should pair Murray with, and that's where the Kingsbury decision came in. So he was, and he credited Adrian Wilson's help on that as well. So we know that he was highly influential on that pick and that whole thing. We've also seen it before with Robert Kimdiche, where Bidwill was said, "I'm a great judge of character, being a attorney," that one blew up in everyone's face, obviously, because within 2 days of minicamp, Bruce Arians was not saying very kind words about Kimdiche's work ethic and effort. He didn't call him knee deep. That was another kind of blow up in your face pick with DJ Humphries. I mean, there's often been that disconnect between who the Cardinals are choosing and how the coaches react to them. And now you have Monti Ossenfort, who I believe is trying to align this whole thing between the coaches so that they're well aware and that they have input on who they want the Cardinals to take and are well versed in that. And they're trying to align the type of players that they pick with the systems that they run. So, I mean, that's all very positive. But in light of Mike Caspino's, revelations about the conversations he had with Michael Bidwill about personnel, it was very curious. He said, so, he asked Bidwill, did you play football yourself? And he said, yes, in high school in Washington, D.C. And he said, so, then he asked, well, were you heavily involved in personnel decisions? He goes, absolutely. And Caspino concluded after that conversation, it's no wonder why the Cardinals stink. Crazy. Of course, Caspino's, defending his client, and he's biased. But, I mean, I think that in some certain respects, his reaction to hearing what Bidwill said about his involvement would be similar, certainly, to my reaction. I mean, I've been miffed all these years of the disconnect and of decision making with personnel. I think we all have with Steve Keim, was an extension of Michael Bidwill. See, what Bidwill does is he gets guys. He's a control freak. He gets guys that he can manipulate, and it's always a quid pro quo. You know, if if you let me do this, I'll do this for you, type of thing. And the hardest navigating Bidwill's had to do, like when he came into the job, he fired Rod Graves, said it was the toughest decision ever. Well, he fired Rod Graves because Rod Graves had so much more experience than he did. And, in promoting Steve Keim, essentially what Bidwill was able to do is control the whole situation. This is when he took over the team in 2013, or the running of the team completely. So, and ever since, I mean, that's why I think the person who stood most in the way of total control during Keim's tenure was Bruce Arians, and I think there were some real internal, angst going on between Arians and Bidwill. Arians is more of the Bill Parcells, like you ought to let me shop for the groceries type guy, and it was pretty clear that picks would come in, and a couple times they've had them on these picks on the field, Arians would have adverse reactions, and almost like a WTF. What are you giving me this guy for? So the control aspect is a key thing here. What kind of control does he have now? Bidwill could easily control Steve Wilks. That's why he doesn't hire. Not that experienced head coaches are lining up. Frank Reich was, but that's why he doesn't hire experienced head coaches. He wants someone new. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury was the ultimate controlled head coach, probably of all time, because he really wasn't a head coach. He was hired to coach Kyler and run the offense. And people in the building said that Vance Joseph was more of a head coach than Kingsbury because of Vance's experience. But Vance was never given the title. And the Cardinals could have been better off with Vance as head coach so that Kingsbury could just focus his time and energy on the offense, which he, in my opinion, delivered handsomely while he was in Arizona. And that last year was an anomaly. But what led into that last year were through Bidwill and his actions, and Keim and his actions, and the agent Eric Burkhart and his actions set the place on fire, and it became like a conflagration. So getting to the point about Mike Caspino's uncovering that Bidwill is actively involved in the decision making for personnel, and also knowing that right now Bidwill his public persona has taken continues to take hit after hit after hit. I mean, this talk about blowing up in your face. The McDonaugh situation is blown up in Bidwill's face in epic proportions. We're still waiting to see if the NFL sanctions Bidwill. Most seem to think that Roger Goodell won't do that to Bidwill, and that Bidwill has been arrogant through the process with his thinking and understanding that he'll be protected by the NFL shield and by Roger Goodell. But they weren't last year for cheating on hiring Gannon, which cost the team a third-round pick. So Bidwill may be, he's the puppeteer who's pulling the strings on everyone he can control in the Cardinals building. But he's begun to lose some control outside of the Cardinals with Goodell and the NFL because of the constant attention he's been drawing to some of the, abusive aspects of his leadership and treatment of people. So, now because of the McDonaugh situation and it now being very, tenuous for Bidwill, to the point where, like, Mike Florio has been asking after the report came out from Mike Caspino about Bidwill's involvement in personnel. Mike Florio asked the perfectly logical question, that why then wouldn't the Arizona media ask Monti and Jonathan Gannon at their pre-draft presser just how involved Michael Bidwill is? And people are pissed at Mike Florio, but in my opinion, Mike Florio is a godsend for this situation, because the more Bidwill gets exposed, the more likely we are finally to see him take a back seat and relinquish control, and even ideally entertain the thought of selling the team, which seems like was so often a remote possibility. But the more and more things that come down on Bidwill, and the more that comes out about his his abusive treatment of people, and just heinous attack he made on McDonough's family and McDonough, which now he faces major repercussions for with the civil suits that are lining up against him. And he lost $3 million in a kangaroo NFL court, for drawing up these just hideous lies about McDonough as a family man, which was really damning, not only to potentially damning and slanderous to Terry McDonaugh, but also to Terry McDonough's wife and his daughter. So, it hit below the belt on all three levels. And now Bidwill's going to have to keep writing checks. And here's a guy who's writing checks to all the bad decisions that he's made over the last several years. He's still paying Cliff Kingsbury. I think probably Steve Wilkes is off the books now, but he'd been paying Wilkes for years. And the staff members that were let go and didn't get jobs, or jobs with the same kind of salary.
I would presume that Steve Keim and some people from that regime are still under pay from the organization at this point, although I'm not sure about that.
Well, and under oath, it was revealed that Steve Keim was paid $1 million to cooperate and testify on the behalf of Bidwill at these NFL hearings, the private hearings given by the NFL appointed mediator, arbiter, whatever, judge. That in itself is another. I mean, what a tangled web Bidwill has weaved, because with Keim's involvement is at the front and center of all of this, and the burner phones and all that. So, what goes around comes around. I mean, Bidwill has created such bad karma for the organization in so many ways that if you have a whistleblower like or someone vigilant like Mike Florio in the media, who's reacting as a normal person should to just the continuance of lying and cheating and abusing that has taken place under Michael Bidwill's watch. And Mike Caspino was convinced that that Steve Keim deliberately lied under oath during his deposition. And I think I'm convinced that that is actually true. But, and one could say, well, he could be charged with perjury, not in that rigged kind of a setting. It's not, you know, Kime could have said whatever he wanted.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't know the dynamics of NFL arbitration court, but I assume it's not real court, right? Like, you can
Right,
testify that you're telling the truth, but you can't be
right,
held criminally liable for perjury, I would
right.
guess.
I mean, the bizarre thing is that Kime tried to say at the deposition that the burner phones were McDonough's idea, which makes absolutely no sense because if they were, McDonough wouldn't have been concerned about it and angry about having to break the rules to do this, particularly with a new head coach who was very felt very awkward and tense about the whole situation and didn't want to do it. And he was trying to speak on the behalf of Steve Wilkes, and he was just every time he did. I mean, Bidwill, he would got in McDonough's face and you know issued a an expletive laced tirade, um, and basically banish McDonough to the back end of the building. And, no longer was McDonough sitting with Kime and Bidwill during the games. I mean, the whole thing was a mess. And where it has bearing now is it raises the question of what's going to happen at pick 4, which everybody is on, pins and needles trying to figure out what's going to happen. And as we know, Monti Ossenfort has said with a neon sign, we're open for business, for potential trade talks. He's been saying that consistently, and they doubled down on it again this week. My question is, when you put 2 and 2 together, see, Michael Bidwill, particularly when he's under fire and his reputation is at stake, will do what he thinks the fans want him to do. And will do that because he hopes that the fans will deem him a hero. Case in point, the Kyler Murray contract, which was one of the most reckless decisions, in my opinion, I've ever seen, because he had a divided locker room, and the message that sent out to the team after the player had refused to go back in the playoff game, and sat alone on the bench sat on the side with Colt McCoy, an assistant coach, while the rest of the team was kneeling in prayer for Buda Baker. All of that was just so ugly. And then the scrubbing of the socials, like nothing to do with the Cardinals. The player essentially quit on the team. And the teammates know that. And when you do that in football, in a team sport like that, you alienate so many people, and you can alienate fans. I mean, once Kyler did that, he alienated me, and I was one of his staunchest proponents and promoters. In fact, I was the first one to argue we should take him over, even though we drafted Rosen, because I clearly saw a more talented player. But I never would have envisioned, the way this thing played out. And then, so that was a really, really, and then at the same time, giving Kime and Kingsbury 5-year contract extensions. I mean, I thought at the time we needed an intervention. I mean, this is a guy who's gone out of his mind. I mean, it's just crazy decision making. All when it went back to the day after the Rams debacle, Kyle Odegaard reported that in the building, Bidwill was storming around and then calling this private meeting between Kime and Kingsbury, and was, in a tirade about certain things. And how, obviously the obvious thing would be was what's going on with Kyler Murray. That was disgusting. not only his play, but what's going on here, and which have been totally rightful of Bidwill to ask, but and to come out of that with okay, well, everyone's going to get paid. It's just bizarre. This is how we're going to handle it. We'll just, no matter what people have done, you're all going to get 5-year extensions with pay raises, and in the case of Murray, significant one. So, and then another example of hero ball was Bidwill thinking, well, once the news was going to come out that DeAndre Hopkins was going to be suspended for first 6 games of 2022 for a ped violation, which of course Hopkins denied and said he'll provide the proof at some point. We never saw that. I mean, it's BS. But fans bought into it. Oh yeah, he must not have. DeAndre Hopkins is a hypochondriac. He wouldn't take anything that he wasn't aware. I mean, he would know exactly, be aware of what he was taking. He didn't want to get a flu shot. That's his right, and a lot of people are like that way. I don't. That's not a criticism; it's just a reality. But these kind of hasty, precipitous. If this was imagine how all of the crisis and drama could have been averted if Michael Bidwill just decided to do something right from the beginning and put his foot down and say, I don't care how long you hold out. We have you under rights. We're going to issue your 5th-year option, and we want you to play out the contract. So you can either sit out or do whatever you want, but you're under control and we're not trading you. Or he could have decided, you know what, this is a real problem. I got to trade this guy because I'm losing the locker room. But the last thing you'd want him to do is cave in. But why did he cave in? The fans. Our Cardinal fans are just, once they get they're like a dog with a bone. Once they get it in their mind that this has to be done, like they've been doing 2 years now with Marvin Harrison Jr., to the point where on Phoenix TV right now, even the Phoenix TV sportscasters are saying it's Marv or we riot. It's just, this has taken on a life of its own. And because Bidwill is well aware of this, I mean, look what Bidwill did when Hopkins was out. He flies in Hollywood Brown on this, big to-do show on stage at the Fan Fest. And that turned out to be like the Hopkins trade, it blew up. It was awful. And there was a great player there, Tyler Linderbaum, who seemed like the perfect pick for the Cardinals at the time. I mean, just decision after decision. But the common denominator is that Bidwill loves to play hero ball, where it buys him, like some fans will say, oh, thank God for Michael Bidwill. He re-signed Kyler Murray. He's going to get us Marvin Harrison Jr. And, everything's going to be fine once we have that and this and that. And so it would be so predictable right now. Bidwill would just say, look, guys, I'm going to make this pick, and it's clear to me who's been top of our board for the last 2 years. We're going to stick and pick, but go ahead and say we're open for business because this could drive up the tension. We can take it right down to the last seconds, the 15, whatever 10 minutes we get, to where everyone's anxious, like, will it be a trade or will they stick and pick? And then, Kyle's going to ring this in, pick is in. Oh my God, the Cardinals are staying. Who's it going to be? And we all know who's it's going to be. It's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. Bidwill will deliver him on a platter to the Cardinals fans. And this isn't about, it's a business decision. You got a marquee name, household name. Now you're getting a player with tremendous upside, but it's just incredibly bizarre that in the pre-draft process, Marvin Harrison Jr. has been mostly a ghost. And, the one guy you've been, fans have been clamoring for 2 years, won't talk at the combine, comes in and out of the combine, having met with a couple teams, does not work out for anyone. You have the RAS scores on every wide receiver in this draft, but you can't get one on Marvin Harrison Jr. because he won't run for anyone. The fans are bending over backwards saying, like, he can do whatever he wants. He's a generational player. He's going to be a 10-time Pro Bowler. This before he's played any snaps. And I just behoove you to go watch some of his games last year. And that will, and ask yourself how he's going to beat NFL cornerbacks with the way he played in some of those games, including the first half of the Michigan game, which was very costly. Now, on other moments of those games, he was absolutely brilliant and fantastic. He can turn it on, and he's got the talent. But I'm still not convinced in short area speed what he's got. He's not the kind of separator. He doesn't separate, mostly because when he runs, he kind of glides. That's why they call him Maserati Marv. He's a glider, not really a sprinter. And so, and I don't know how that's going to translate into the NFL. That's going to be a big question. We also saw on tape his hesitancy to catch balls over the middle. So I mean, there are questions about that aspect of his game, whether he'd be willing to do, if he wasn't willing to do it more consistently at Ohio State, will he even want to touch it on in the NFL level? And this morning on Twitter, there's a debate going on as to whether Marvin should be asked to block. I'm not kidding you. There are fans saying, no, that shouldn't be. It's like saying Patrick Peterson shouldn't have to tackle. And there's an aspect of Marv that, it's like Peterson, like Kyler, they want to play in tuxedos. That's been a bane to the Cardinals, chances for winning for years, is these double standards of giving star players the autonomy to pick and choose which parts of their job they want to do and which parts they don't want to do. And that's a concern. The other thing that struck me profoundly this week is that what if Marvin Harrison Jr. has three kind of, flashes of upside that really get you encouraged, but also, some struggles, which you would expect from any rookie. But let's say in 3 years, he's been good, but not great. What are you going to do? What's going to happen when in 3 years he could balk at the 5th-year option the way Kyler did and decide he's not going to play until he gets a bag? And the problem with that is the increasing value of wide receiver contracts, which by then in 3 years could mean he'll be asking for $33 to $35 million a year after 3 good but not great years. And you're stuck all over again, having to make this decision. I mean, this is one of the things about Michael Bidwill that frustrates me, is he's in the here and now and has very little capacity to look what the ramifications could be of a decision down the road. Perfect example is the Murray contract. He delivered that contract on a platter to Cardinals fans to excite them, and figured everyone would renew their tickets. when a lot of fans like myself were so turned off about how that season ended and what his role in that was, there's a divided fan base. There was a divided, but most of the clamoring from the fans was, you have to sign him now because it's going to get richer later. He's the franchise quarterback. I was questioning that. He wasn't behaving like a franchise quarterback, you know. So, but doing that at the time, put it this way: since uh, since that decision, the Cardinals. Well, let's see now. They are 8-26 since that decision. Since that decision, Kyler Murray's QBRs are the lowest of his career. So, and yes, he played in a new system, and yes, he flashed really well in the Philly game, and it's all encouraging, and now he's more committed in the building while pocketing his 10.5 mil for being there, which was in his contract. Can't blame him for, but you can blame Bidwill. If that's what it took to get Kyler in the building, he had to bribe him. With franchise quarterbacks, typically you can't get them out of the building, and it's not a pay me for, except in my contract, not an added bonus up on top of what the other players make. So it's, but I mean, it's so predictable that Bid will want to swoop in here now and be the hero and deliver Marvin Harrison Jr. And to a lot of people, that will make them so ecstatic. But the karma surrounding all this just feels awful. I mean, the cheating to get Gannon, a defensive-minded head coach, tapping an offensive player first when the defense is flat out awful. I mean, if I have to go another year of people saying, well, it's because the talent sucks. Well, how about addressing the talent and doing it properly? I mean, passed on Will Anderson Jr. I'm the best defensive player in that 2023 draft. And look at us now. We still don't have an edge and still couldn't sign one in free agency. A bona fide edge that is going to get double-digit sacks. Our highest sack total guy was Dennis Gardeck with 6. We had 33 sacks in the NFL, which was 30th. 1 sack over the last 6 games. Now, is Dallas Turner the number 4 pick in a draft? I think in a normal draft, he's probably tail end of the first round. There's no slam dunk edge player in this draft. Latu would be the closest. Latu of UCLA, but the neck injury is giving teams pause. And he retired once 3 years ago. If you give him first round money and he retires, that's going to be a real issue. So that's a tricky situation. Certainly to take him high in this draft would be very risky. You'd have to be totally convinced that he's going to be good for it. And then Verse, boy, what a hot and cold set of tapes that is. I mean, it's just galling at times when you see players dog it on the field. And there are times he just takes plays off. Now he came on strong down the end, but of course he had very good incentive to do that. The question is, will he be a Terrell Suggs, the Cardinals version, once he gets to the NFL? Like take plays off, decide when he's going to really put it, get after it. And on some plays, no, I'm not going to do that. You want guys with nonstop motors, and in his case, his is not nonstop. It's by choice. And so I mean, they're your top 3 guys. And in a normal draft, again, those guys would be down the line, but because it's such a weak draft, they're right at the top. But getting back to the karma, I mean, the tanking to get Marvin Harrison Jr., the photoshopping of him in a Cardinals uniform ad nauseum for 2 years on social media. I mean, right now, fans are on there deciding what number he should have. Play the three choices were 0, 11. Some people wanted to take Larry's number. The karma of that just irks me to no end. And then, or 18, which means there have to be, I think someone has 18. I think it's Ojolari or something already, but something could be made there. And then the karma of a guy like Odunze, who, in my mind, I mean, I just am so impressed with that young man. I mean, the way he crushed everything in this offseason, including even showing up to his pro day, not having done all the workouts and everything for everybody already, but he was there to celebrate his teammates and to cheer them on. He is the ultimate teammate. He took a four-win team program into help. He was the alpha. Ian Penix and Jalen Polk, who I also love. Those three guys put that team on their backs with Troy Fontano and Roger Rosengar, and they have two really good tackles. And, they put that team on their backs and got them to a natty in 2 years. And this guy's done everything not only well, he's crushed it. And if you listen to him talk and if you see what an alpha he is, I mean, in my mind, you can't get a soundbite from Marvin Harrison Jr. He won't talk at the combine, and his dad talks for him. I mean, how bizarre is that? And on a video, his dad did all the talking, and his son came in with one sentence at the end about how he's training. I mean, it's just bizarre. And this is a guy everyone celebrated losses for. This is a guy that, in my opinion, Jonathan Gannon was the, like the just, happiest loser of a coach I've ever seen. I mean, he's in the locker room after games, doesn't even look bothered. Just like, this is the way, I like what we're doing in the process, and there were some good plays, and I mean, never looked pissed, never looked upset. I mean, meanwhile, back in the locker room, the guys who tried to put it on the line out there are licking their wounds. I mean, they're ones getting clunked and putting it out there. And a coach just comes in and can be this cavalier. And this aspect of losing, that, well, we know we blew the whole thing up, so we knew we were going to lose this year, but now next year we're going to rip it. It's just all of that defies football integrity. And these guys talk a lot about football integrity, and yet already have compromised it so much to an egregious extent. I mean, the cheating to get Gannon in the building. It goes on and on. The willing acceptance of losing. I mean, people won't say this, but there's no doubt in my mind that Matt Prater was given a quid pro quo from Bidwill or Gannon or someone. I bet he's got a little handsome bonus in his contract now for shanking those kicks. All of that to me created a karma that is just unavoidable. And I think and this is why the football gods cannot stand the Arizona Cardinals, because they're not lovable. I mean, they don't do smart things, and they constantly compromise on football integrity. Kyle, what do you think?
Well, I don't jump down all of the Marvin Harrison Jr. antics and think that that's something that can be held as a negative. I agree with you that it's weird that his father did the press conference at the pro day and he was kind of standing off to the side. I thought that was a little bit strange.
Right,
Actually, I thought it was quite a bit strange when it was going down, but
right.
for the most part, I mean, a lot of the pre-draft process has been such a over the years, I have started to pay less and less attention to the pre-draft process in a sense that it gives you some insight into the people that are getting drafted, but it doesn't really give you insight into their work ethic or abilities and things like that. And I'm not the one watching the tape to necessarily break some of those things down. And so I'm trusting the judgment of others. And I trust your judgment when you talk about Brock Bowers because I've seen Brock Bowers play college football. I know he's an absolute stud. He's a
Yep.
consensus top 10 prospect in this draft class. And I think it makes a lot of sense for teams to consider him at the top of the draft if that's the player that they want. Same thing with Rome Odunze. Most people don't have him as their number one receiver prospect, but they acknowledge that he is a really, really great prospect in this draft class, especially one that is so offensive heavy. And maybe in a different year, Rome Odunze would be the number one wide receiver consensus wise going
Right,
into the draft. I think all of those
right.
things are such, and I I tend to just sit it out the character conversations or sit out the things about the player until after they've been drafted because if you're setting yourself up for Marvin Harrison Jr. and then say they trade out of the pick, which is, what I think a lot of Cardinal fans are anticipating as the secondary option instead of stick and pick at 4 for someone who's not Marvin Harrison Jr. Well then if you make the trade back, you're not getting Marvin Harrison Jr. anyways, unless it's with the Giants. But I don't foresee the Giants making that jump from 6 to 4 to take a quarterback. But trade down, you don't even get that player anyways. So it's good to hope for something. It's good to get excited about something. And this is, I mean, I know you talked about the bad karma of the tanking aspect to everything, but this is the pick that will define the rebuild for the Cardinals. Everything they've been working towards the last 2 years, this is the pick that comes of it. And so I understand why there's so much attention paid to it, so much pressure applied to it, and why people want Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, just this morning, Marvin Harrison Jr. was named, or he announced that he signed his partnership as the first ever New Balance football athlete. Like he is going to be the face of an apparel company and their growing football line now. So add that into the mix of like, this is someone who is perceived to be not just a future great football player, but an incredibly famous future football player. And I understand why people would be excited about the possibility of attaching themselves to that.
Yeah, good for him. There's still a possibility. This isn't totally out of the realm of, that, this is an unprecedented thing for New Balance to take on a client like this. Will it also be unprecedented, but not impossible to think that if Marvin Harrison Sr. doesn't like the team that drafts his son, he could file a lawsuit against the NFL and petition make a petition for his son to return to Ohio State. And that's been discussed and talked about by some pundits. And the reason why he can do that is he hasn't hired an agent. Once you hire an agent, it's almost impossible to come back from that. But because he hasn't hired an agent, this keeps the door open, put it that way. And what a karma that would be. The Cardinals, all excited, fans going crazy and everything. Bidwill's the hero and wants to fly Marvin in that night to the Fan Fest. Make the big to-do production like he did with Hollywood Brown. And suddenly, upon further review, you have to check the replay. The Harrisons aren't that excited about this, pick from Arizona, and they're discussing matters. Um, that too might make more sense out of why Marvin Harrison Jr. has been such a ghost in the pre-draft process. I mean, let me put it to you this way. I mean, if I were an agent, one of the things I would stress to a player is you're not just talking to the media at the combine for owners and GMs and coaches. You're talking for the fans. And you can win fans over in those pre-draft interviews. I'll tell you this, the major thing that made me so excited about the Paris Johnson trade, even though I didn't like what they had to give up to come back up to get him, was that I saw him talk at the combine, and I made a mental note then, this is a guy I really like to have, because he was so impressive. And, you know, problem is that I think he would have been better with a better team and better leaders on a team than what he had in Arizona. I mean, his first year is kind of a bit of a disappointment, and the position change he had to go through. I mean, classic Cardinals to like keep drafting rookies and putting them in places where they'd have to make a major adjustment on top of making the major adjustment of converting to the NFL. It puts you behind the eight ball from the beginning. I mean, trying to catch up to the speed of the NFL, playing at a position you weren't playing the year before, is a recipe for struggle. And that's what we saw. PJJ came on stronger at the end, so that was encouraging. And I think there's a lot to build on in that young man. But I'm hoping this offseason, upon reflecting, Paris Johnson Jr. will create his own standard of leadership that will transcend what's been going on in the building with the player leadership. We need a higher level of it across the board. And, and it's just was crazy to me how the new coaches and GM kind of suppressed the leadership of Budda Baker, who is he and James Conner are the two alphas in that building. And I don't know why in the world they didn't hitch their wagons to Budda Baker. That is one of the most mystifying things to me. And some of the other players they hitched their wagons to is such a head scratcher. All the while they were saying, oh, we don't know anyone yet, so we're going to treat everything as wide open. It's total bullshit. They came in with preconceived notions and exerted on them from day one. And, who did those notions come from about players they didn't know? Michael Bidwill had to.
Well, yeah, because everyone else was gone by that point. They cleaned shop right before that.
Exactly. And then, now, Adrian Wilson's gone, Quentin Harris is gone, all the guys who were in the building. But
well, it's not just that those people are gone. There's not any retention of coaches. There's been very little retention of players going back to even when Ossenfort and Gannon were hired at this point. I mean, if I'm thinking, assuming DJ will ultimately be gone from the team, I mean, you're talking about Kyler Murray, James Conner, Budda Baker, Jalen Thompson, and Zaven Collins, I guess, and not a whole lot of people who have been there since even when Monti Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon took over.
Right. Yeah. Yep. So, and then if you just tack on what's going on with the McDonaugh thing and the timing of that, and how that was so mishandled by Bidwill again. I mean, the karma about all that, it's just a black cloud hanging over the program.
So about the McDonaugh point, I wanted to ask you this question while we were talking about it. I don't think there's going to be any way, unless some reporting comes out that we are not foreseeing, I don't know if there's going to be any way to verify like if Bidwell's forcing the pick of Marvin or if he's forcing the pick of someone else, I just don't know how we're going to be able to confirm who Monty wanted and who didn't without,
Right.
someone being disgruntled and going to like someone with high power in the organization being disgruntled with the decision and going forward. So
Right.
does it feel to you like a futile effort to try and map out intent when it comes to what picks they want to make if we're not going to have that access to information? Or do you look at it like, well, we know Austin Fort's not kind, but we also know that Bidwell still has his fingerprints over everything still at this point. Is it still safe to just make that assumption and work from there?
I think you're right. Yes. Um, Particularly in light of how recently he talked to Mike Caspino about his role in personnel. I mean, Bidwill is a hands-on control freak. He always
Mhm.
has been, and that's the problem. Is he chokes the life out of the place with his controlling nature, and he dabbles in things he doesn't really understand. I mean, it's almost comical to think that he thinks of himself as a football guru when the decisions that he makes. For years we've been running a 3-4 defense. We still have no freaking clue how to draft for a 3-4 defense, and you keep putting guys in the wrong spots. It's a joke. Um, I mean, you might as well be running a 2-5, 4 defense. It doesn't matter if who you're drafting doesn't fit. You're drafting round pegs to put in square holes. It's just a systematic failure, and so that's the thing is with it's such a great question because here's what else I would anticipate. See, not only will this be about making Michael Bidwill the hero in delivering the fans Marvin Harrison Jr., it's also going to be, I think, when the media finally does ask Gannon and Ossenford about Bidwell, you just know right now what they're going to say. Oh, we don't see anything wrong. They'll do the Kyler thing. From day one, he's been so supportive and he's been here every day doing his thing. And, he's given us everything we need. He's everything we could want in an owner. They're going to say that because they're under control and because they know it's a quid pro quo. That's what my other thing about, the one thing that fans keep insisting was, but the team played so hard. And so, they love Gannon. Let me just say this as a reality. All right. Um, when you threaten players with their livelihoods, you're going to get them to play hard. I mean, that's what Keim would do every time the team had a bad game. He'd go in the locker room and threaten them all with their livelihoods and said he was going to watch tapes extra carefully now. This is where we are as an organization, able to threaten the players. I mean, Jonathan Gannon in that just bizarre, who took the bus here, opening address to the team, said to the players, I'm looking for killers. Okay. So this was right before saying, like, do you feel that something burning inside you? Is there a burning desire inside of you? Saying it all sort of softly and, matter of factly. Well, I'm looking for killers. You know, I'm like, so, all right. Maybe that's why on one of the first plays of the season, Kaiser White, um, Gannon's, prize free agent, takes aim at Sam Howell, who's clearly out of bounds, and just absolutely pummels him. Flags go flying everywhere. Was that Kaiser White trying to make a statement about being a killer? I mean, Howell was so clearly out of bounds. You just knew White was just going to make the statement, and he didn't care. And so, but then you're talking to football players, and all their language is like, we want guys who play with violence. Okay. Meanwhile, the coach is about as passive as hell as you can get. It's just bizarre. All right. So, yeah, you think you're talking those players' language, but they know the nature of the game. They know it's a violent game. What you want are guys who have the desire to win, guys who have the desire to be teammates, guys who have the desire to sink their toes in everything and dig in. But there are ways to get that out of players other than threatening their jobs. And so I would just say to everyone, before you start thinking that Gannon did all this, this was an ultimate scenario of you better put it all out there or you're gone. And so, some players who didn't want to be gone played hard, obviously would have to play hard. But was it an inspiring, set of teamwork? I mean, I just go back to that defense, which bothered me so much all year. That's the way it was coached. It was coached to lose. I mean, shuffling lines in like hockey players. Every time a guy made a great play, he's taken off the field. You got a rookie who's busting his butt off. You put him on Cooper Kupp and he gets burned, and you take him out for 4 games. I mean, all these just you put guys out of position. You don't have a true Mike linebacker, but your true Mike, you're playing on the edge to the tune of 1 tackle a game. It's not impacting the game. I mean, all of it was just so bizarre to me. But here's the worst part of it for me, was that when, like, Budda Baker comes storming down an alley and make a great tackle, Budda walks away alone and no one comes near him. I mean, this is football. This is playing with brothers. I mean, when a brother runs the alley and makes a stick, you go and pick him up and, slap him on the head. I mean, I saw none of that from this defense, except individual, sack dances. But or then if there was a turnover, they did the run to the end zone thing. But on typical plays where guys made really good tackles, it wasn't celebrated. That says a lot to me. It means a lot to me because it says that, that they're out there doing their jobs, is what it said to me. We're not necessarily have to do this as a team, but each of us individually is going through a job interview about present and future. So, but let's just shift. I really loved your question, and it was so smart. Would we ever really know?
Well, I think to answer your question, it's not going to come or maybe to answer my own. I don't think it's going to come from Monti Ossenfort or Jonathan Gannon unless they, get fired and then they're willing to talk about their time in Arizona. But this is where the importance of reporting comes into play. This is where local reporters with sources and connections go out and find information. This is where your Mike Florios, your Jeremy Fowlers get involved and talk to people anonymously within the organization. That's where you can get really good access to information, is from reporters who are talking to people within the organization about what's happening. And if there's something strange or in particular about the Cardinals draft process, it would be nice to know about it, especially because so many people are invested in the success of this draft pick, because it's the draft pick that will come to define what is about to be a 3-year long rebuild for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah. So the best way I can respond to that, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because this will now, in my opinion, of course, Monti and JG are going to have to gush about this decision, and it's been what they've been planning on all along. When the irony is, I would predict this. I think Rome Odunze walked into that building and changed everything. Changed the whole dynamic. I mean, Rome Odunze is an alpha. Is Marvin Harrison Jr. This whole draft process has explained that he's not. He's a follower. He's not an alpha. He's not doing his own thing. I mean, he's not standing up for himself. I mean, he's having others speak for him, and he won't speak himself. That's not an alpha. An alpha is, I'm going to show up anyway, and I'm going to show people what I've got. And I'm coming not just, for me, but for my future teammates, for my future fans. I want to build fans right now. I want to get out there and show you what I got, which is exactly what Rome Odunze did. And then when you listen to this young man talk, I mean, I did back at I was comparing all three of those guys in interviews. I went and watched their interviews, their college interviews, because that's part of the job, process. Is you're not just drafting the player, you're drafting the person. And so what's going to happen is, I think in a different scenario, if they're not saving the day for Bidwill, I bet Monti would trade down a little to try to stay in with distance to get Rome Odunze and be just even more happy with it because he fits the profile that they've been saying all along.
Well, if he's more happy with it, then they'll just take Rome Odunze at 4. That's the other thing about it. If they would be more happy in the first place with Rome Odunze, they would just stick and pick him at 4, I would believe. They wouldn't risk trading back and not getting him.
If Monti was in charge. But what if he's not? And with Bidwill telling Caspino, no, I'm front and center in all this. And I'm a football guy and I dabble in this. I mean, Bidwill was with Kingsbury watching film 2 years ago. Meddling that closely. I mean, he's totally hands-on in this and that. So, and no one would know better than Bidwill what it's going to mean to the Cardinals fans it's true. There's a faction of fans, rabid fans, the same ones who were insisting he had to sign Kyler to his bag after 3 years. They're like goo goo gaga over Marvin Harrison to the point of saying it's Marvin or we riot.
What I would argue to that point though is that if people are so excited about Marvin Harrison Jr. in that way, they are more likely to fall in line and love whoever they pick after the fact than be resentful at the end. I think the pre-draft process is one thing and everyone gets excited about the possibilities and they link on to one person. But what most fan bases do, and granted, I understand Arizona Cardinals fans are not always like most fan bases. It's a very unique sort of experience in this fan base, but most people end up falling in line with the person after they're picked, whether it's the person they thought it was going to be, whether it's someone else, they usually get in line. Case in point, how many people were Will Anderson people last year and wanted them to stick and make that pick? And then when it ended up being Paris Johnson and the trade, everyone was like, oh, this is actually just as good, if not better, because look, we just swindled the Houston Texans out of a trade. I think most you're more likely to have people who are Marvin or we riot fall in line and get excited about whoever they pick than just continuing to be upset for the rest of the time that they don't get Marvin Harrison Jr.
In this case, I don't foresee that because of how in tune I am with Cardinal fans. Let me ask you this, and I know you'll answer it honestly. Who's the more marquee name, Marvin Harrison Jr. or Rome Odunze?
I'm going to go with the person who has a shoe with New Balance that is called the Prodigy. I'm going to go with that guy.
The Prodigy. There it is, right? Okay. So, and Cardinal fans are invoking the old, we passed on Suggs, we passed on Adrian Peterson, everybody, we We took Andy Isabella in front of DK Metcalf, even though people forget that Metcalf missed most of his games his last year at Mississippi because of a neck injury. Talk about Lateo Latu. You know, so, but Cardinal fans won't ever let that go. They're more at times impressed with names than they are with, like, the DeAndre Hopkins trade. There are some fans who still think that was the greatest move the Cardinals ever made. And when you look at how Hopkins treated the Cardinals, I mean, and look at what happened. It's just, and look at the wake of fired GMs and coaches everywhere he's been. And, I don't think that's a coincidence. For fans to still think, but we had DeAndre Hopkins. What's interesting is, to me too, is like they don't talk about JJ Watt that way. It's just weird. It's like DeAndre Hopkins was like a god on a pedestal. And, and of course the Hail Murray pass started to cement a legend. But from that point on, pretty much it was all downhill for Hopkins in Arizona. Much of his own doing, by the way.
Yeah, we talked about this a couple weeks ago when Marcos was here. The idea that the trade was still a success for the Cardinals, but it was far from the we just swindled the Texans that people thought it was, because, Hopkins gave them a very good to great year and a half, and then the injuries started setting in, and then the PED violation, and the last year and a half was not great. It was a tough end for the final year and a half, but the first year and a half was awesome, and they didn't have to give up very much to get him in the first place. It just went from, oh, we just swindled the Texans out of a trade to, we still did well, but the Texans don't feel as bad about getting rid of Hopkins. Maybe they got rid of him a year or two too early, but they don't feel awful about the trade that they made. And ironically, that's exactly what just happened again.
Right. It's interesting how karma has shifted for the Texans.
Yes.
Now that they got rid of their, I think the football gods appreciated that they got rid of Deshaun Watson. They got rid of Hopkins. And Hopkins put it on that, what we can just go back and through. I just saying about name guys that, and it just even goes to other guys on the roster, is that if you're not a well-known first or second round pick, most of the fans don't think you'll ever amount to anything. I mean, it takes a lot. And the expression is jag. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, just another guy.
Right. So the Cardinals have Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, and everybody else is a jag. The offensive line sucks. They always will suck. I will say this right now. Everybody's clamoring about drafting more offensive linemen. I mean, when all of our linemen are back and they signed 2 linemen, one to a $30 million contract, that fans now want the Cardinals to spend their second first-round pick on a tackle. Even though we drafted Paris Johnson Jr. and signed Jonah Williams to a 2-year, $30 million deal. Let's draft a tackle there. I mean, it's just bizarre. It's like all offense because of Kyler. And we have the worst pass rush in the NFL, and nobody wants to talk about that. All of that's bizarre. But, I mean, this is why, no one will be more acutely aware of what the fans want than Michael Bidwill. This is what he does. This is how he tries to play hero. I mean, they might as well, like at the Fan Fest, have Bidwill parachute out of his plane and land down with the pick to announce to the world it's Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, this is the way he thinks. This is the way he, and now he'll be hailed as this, hero and of delivering the guy everybody wanted. And the problem is, and I'll just say this, and this is what I was leading to before, is how compromising that's going to be for Monti Ossenfort, who will know deep down inside there was another guy in this building who really enamored them. And given it could have been their call, it probably would have been different. But they can't, Michael Bidwill can't risk the backlash that's going to come. If it was pick four, with your and Cardinals select Rome Odunze, the whole place would go crazy because it's unexpected. And then you're going to see Cardinal fans gasping. And, the shock of that would be just so enormous. Now, if they traded down and took Odunze, it's another thing because you're getting other value. And I think you're right there. The fans could find that, if you're picking up a second round pick in 2025 for trading down and another day 2 pick, and you're getting all this other value, then I think you're right. Then I think the fans can adjust. They'll still lament like they did losing out on Will Anderson.
But you're giving hope for the future. You're giving hope like, oh, this isn't it. We can still hope for next year when the picks come back around that something good will happen then.
Right. And, but that will be, so Monti's going to have to gush about and basically lie. If that's the case, maybe Monti has been pro Harrison Jr. all along. People have close to the situation have said he's been number one on the Cardinals board for 2 years. But I don't know if that's still the case necessarily because of what's going on. And if you saw how Ossenfort handled the question about Marvin Harrison Jr. skipping the combine and then not going to run on his pro day, Monti was, said it wasn't ideal, that, preferred otherwise. He could have easily said, like Gannon would have, oh, with a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., all you have to do is put on the tape and it doesn't matter. He could have said that. But he didn't because he's a football man and he knows everybody wants to know. They want to put these numbers down. And anyone who's watched his tape, you want to know short shuttle. You want to know 3-cone. You want to know these things, how quickly he can turn direction. Like I said, his tape is, he's beautiful at doing it. He's like a gazelle. He glides. But does he have short area quickness? That's why can he, and does he have the alpha in him to play from the slot at times? If they pick him, I hope like heck he becomes like Larry and his evolution is that way. And I'll be hoping for the best, and they can try to maximize the talent of a highly talented. There's no doubt about the talent. There's the doubt is in some of the numbers you'd want to see physically what he can handle, and is he the alpha? Is he the dog that you want from a number 4 pick in a draft? And some guys like Dennis Kelly, a former scout, has been questioning that with the dog in him. And you hate to do that, but and then having watched the tape myself, that Michigan game still nags me wicked. I still don't know what he was doing on that just ridiculous play that he even stopped his route. It was supposed to be a quick slant, and he just stayed in place like stutter stepping. And, the quarterback, McCord, was going to hit him off his break, but the break never happened. And so it was like here's the great irony. What it was like was the A.J. Green debacle in the Green Bay game, where the corner, so Harrison had his back to the ball the whole time and didn't make his break, just as AJ Green had his back to the ball the whole time and was actually watching the play on a jumbotron. And the defensive back just came right around him on the thrown ball and easy peasy pick, which in this case, the Michigan corner took down to like the 5-yard line. And here's the other thing, was upon seeing that the Michigan cornerback who was covering him intercepted the ball and was running towards the goal line, Harrison Jr. didn't even move, didn't even try to chase the play. Dogs would never do that.
So this is to the point you were talking about before, which is the idea that we don't know who Monti Ossenfort has number one on the board, and there's a possibility that it's Rome Odunze. Well, if in this scenario that it were to be Rome Odunze 1, Marvin Harrison 2, Malik Neighbors 3, well, then you end up at 4 and you stick and pick your best receiver in the draft under, the most logical of circumstances. If you remove other factors, which I understand there are other factors at play, that is the situation that you work with. Or you trade back saying, 1, 2, and 3 are all very good, and we think the additional value of another first round pick makes up for the possibility of getting one of those 3 guys. Or maybe even we end up with Brock Bowers by trading back in the draft because for whatever reason Bowers falls below the 10 pick. But in that scenario you were talking about with Odunze, if you stick and pick Odunze at 4 and it's so shocking that everyone thinks you've gone mad because it goes against the conventional draft wisdom, I think there's honor and, a level of it, intrigue in that, but you better be right because those are the kind of picks that you're willing to stake your reputation on a single player. And that's something that is, I think, probably difficult if you're Monti Ossenfort, is like, am I so convinced that I want to take someone over Marvin Harrison Jr. that I am willing to stake my entire tenure as a general manager on making that selection? And I think a lot of times people fall in line because their convictions are not as strong to do something unconventional. Because drafting Rome Odunze would be unconventional, or drafting Brock Bowers would be unconventional, even though you and I both say like it's less unconventional than people think to draft Brock Bowers because he probably should be a top 5 prospect in this draft class. But it's a tough situation that you find yourself in, is trying to do something unconventional if that's what you're convinced of the case might be. Again, we're operating under a hypothetical without, at least in my case, any access to information about who they think is the number 1 prospect in this draft class. I don't know how privy you are to information or have been following, but I have no idea who they view as the number 1 prospect on their boards or what they want to do with draft strategy wise. It's just, this pick, no matter who you take, will end up defining your chances of still having this job 2 years later. And that's the thing that's tough to navigate as well.
Well, when the owner needs this pick more than anyone, he's going to make the call. And, he's going to have whether Ossenfort and Dave Sears and Jonathan Gannon will do anything, they ask him to do. So, but Ossenfort, he'll be asked, and Bidwill will probably make a passionate plea to him, say, look, my ass is on the line here. Fans want Marvin. We've had him top of our board. We need to sell. For the first time in a long time, we're not selling out our building. Our building has half of, the people we sell out to are the opposing fans. We got the crisis here by drafting a big name like Marvin Harrison Jr., who people are already calling a generational talent, which makes me cringe because, like the ghost of Bill Parcells is in my ear going like, he said it best. Potential means you haven't done shit yet. I mean, before this guy's even stepped out on a pro football field with his brand New Balance football shoes. You're already talking about him as a generational. His father was, but his father's was a completely different player, completely different build, completely different. I mean, his father was a dog, total dog. His father was an alpha. That's why his father's doing the talking now. His father's the alpha. And look at the pressure that this kid's going to be under, not only to live up to the billing of his draft status and the contract he's going to get, but also to try to follow in his dad's footsteps. That's pressure, man. I mean, that's a lot of weight on one guy's shoulders. And I think he's a sweet kid. I mean, I've listened to a bunch of his interviews. He's soft spoken. He kind of reminds me of Isaiah Simmons, to be frank. Kind of soft spoken, introspective, kind of introverted a little. And so, and that works for him, obviously. But you juxtapose that with Rome Odunze and how he communicates. It's quite a drastic difference. That all being said, and that's why I think there's so much at stake here for Bidwill that I can't imagine Bidwill just turning it over to Monti. If we do trade down, here's the most exciting thing. If we do trade down and run the risk of moving on from Harrison, that will signal to me that Bidwill now is putting more of his stock into the hands of his own football people, and relinquishing some of the control that he always likes to have. That would be a monumental shift. And that is my excitement about this draft, to see if that happens. I mean, I think if that happens, that's a really good signal for us moving forward, that if we could we've said this all along as fans, so many of us who are frustrated with Bidwill, is if we just put the team in the hands of football guys who's smart enough to make these decisions, then just, write the checks and get out of the way. And this could be a signal of that, even though he'll be in the draft room. I'd love to hear Monti gush about the guy he wanted most at the top of the draft and all the reasons why. And and I'm not convinced that Monti was convinced it was MHJ, but I am convinced that Bidwill would want MHJ because he's the draw.
Yeah, he's the prodigy. And I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier about there's no way to determine intent without some reporting being done and talking to sources within the organization and such. But it sounds like for you, trading down would be verifying that is a Monti move. Like,
correct.
Trading down would be a verification in that sense.
Correct.
But in the opposite sense, drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't necessarily preclude ownership involvement. It just means that the question is still out there, right? It's that we don't know how they came to the conclusion of drafting Marvin Harrison Jr., even though they're going to tell us, everyone was on the same page from ownership to front office to coaching to offensive coordinator. They're going to say organizational alignment, but we don't know intent of organizational alignment without, some Mike Florio's or Jeremy Fowler's or people doing some digging and reporting into what the pre-draft process looked like.
No, and I think it's true that from what the sources that I've heard, Harrison Jr. being on the top of their board for 2 years, I think is true. My question was, I think things have happened in the pre-draft process that may have tweaked the board some, but it won't matter, because if Bidwill arrives at that decision and has the support of Ossenfort, Sears, and Gannon, then they will all they'll all get excited about the pick. and they'll be gushing about it. And um, as is the custom here in Arizona, and talking about what a steal it was, and trying to hint at the other teams what a mistake they made bypassing such a generational talent. That's the way Bidwill will talk about it. Ossenfort's more reserved, and I think more understanding of football karma.
And by the way, that's probably the way the Harrisons will talk about it too, because you use the word alpha for Rome Odunze. Like if you had the one word, it sounds like alpha is the one that you would choose. And the word to choose for Marvin Harrison, the word they want you to choose and want you to associate is prodigy. I mean, that's the name of his shoe. They're
Right,
joining a company that
right,
has three NFL athletes, which are Chase Young, Will Anderson, and now Marvin. And Marvin's going to be the first person to wear New Balance shoes
right,
during NFL games. And you look at it and you say, they want to associate Marvin with prodigy. And I think there's fair reasons for it. Son of a Hall of Famer, number one wide receiver in college football after a sophomore, could have left for the NFL a year ago and been a first round pick. Like there are absolute reasons for calling him a prodigy or calling him the best receiver since Jamar Chase to enter the draft or any of those things. Like there are very much reasons to do so, but I think it's more interesting than anything else that that's what they want to associate is this is a prodigy, this is a star, and you would be foolish to pass up on this star. It just happens to be that the top three teams in the draft are all sticking and picking quarterbacks. And that's something that was probably out of their control. Because remember, a year ago, we were talking about Marvin Harrison as the number one overall pick in the draft. It just happened to be the way the draft order fell that the first three picks were all going to be quarterbacks. But it's interesting that prodigy and star is what they want to associate with Marvin Harrison Jr. and the brand that they're building for him. I think that's so interesting, both from the word association with generational star and the things that people are saying, plus this seems to be what they want, what they're marketing and what they're advertising Marvin as going into the NFL. And you talked about pressure about of putting all of that onto his shoulders, but clearly that is something that he has lived with. He's chosen this life path. His name is Marvin Harrison Jr. So, it's hard to evade that, even as, LeBron James's son chose the name Bronny to kind of, evolve from being LeBron James Jr. a little bit. This is what Marvin's kind of picked, and it's what they're sticking with. And this is this is an incredibly exciting moment. It's what he's been building towards for his entire life, is for this draft moment and to be potentially face of a shoe company and associated with Prodigy.
yeah, and that's maybe part of the reason why when you're a prodigy, you're growing up in the shadows and of tall shadows, long shadows, and to come out on your own as he's done, as a really great football player, that's going to be an evolution of him creating his own path in the NFL. And he's a young kid right now, finding his way and dealing with all those pressures. And the minute he comes a Cardinal, I'm gonna root like crazy for him, and I'll get myself as excited as I can be. I But I also will, wonder what if with of course with Odunze and Bowers, my two favorite offensive players in this draft, because what they have in common is that they ball all the time, and their teams, played in national championships as part of the reason. Part of their impact was that strong. And in the Washington case, to come from 4-win season when they arrived, 2 4-win seasons in a row. Actually, the program was so down, to come roaring back the way they did was awesome. So the way I want to finish this is what I'm hoping for in the first round is a slight trade back. I wrote about this yesterday I want the trade with the Giants, and picking up their 6th and 70th picks. 71 is in the third, picking up a 2025 second round pick and edge Aziz Ojolari, BJ's brother, and that's a major component of this trade for me because the edge situation is so weak. My worry now is they're going to reach for an edge in the first round and even try to trade up for one that isn't worthy enough, and they're going to lose a valuable draft pick. I want them to trade down once in a short distance so they could still get Odunze or Brock Bowers, and then stick and pick the rest of the draft. I really was disappointed last year. At one point, we had the number 33 and 34 picks in the second round and traded out of both of them. And the 34th pick was originally our own pick, was Sam Laporta, who, if you did a redraft of that draft last year, he'd be in the top 16. I mean, I think this draft is loaded on day 2. Loaded. I mean, you're going to find first-round talents, sneaky first-round talents, that if you can pick them out properly, and if the Cardinals can make a trade like that, and now then add to, they would then have 1 second, two, and then 4 thirds. That would be awesome. I mean, and plus they'd have an edge rusher in the building that's, NFL caliber and ready to contribute. And Ojolari's heading into a contract year, so he should be highly motivated and would be delighted to be with his brother. All that feels good to me. That's my thought, or my hope, is the Giants trade. And then at 6, I hope they make the call for Odunze. For me, it's a coin flip between Odunze and Bowers. Either one of those players would have me doing cartwheels because they're cut from the same cloth, and the intangibles there are so strong. But because Odunze was so punctual and so on top of everything, on top of his business, I mean, a dream of mine would be to get Odunze there, and then with a day 2 pick up Jalen Polk. Oh my God, those two kids together and they're best buddies. I mean, that would be so ideal. That would be a dream scenario for me. Then, as we shift to 27, I do not want to see them trade back up and give up any day 2 picks, particularly that first, second round pick. That's the third one in. It's number 35. That's such a valuable pick. Like I said, Sam Laporta was taken with that pick last year. Don't give up that pick, and don't give up the 104 pick, the third pick in the 4th round on day 3. That, because you have all night in both cases to decide your board on the 3 best players you want, because because you're going to get one of them, and you have time to really map that out. I think it's a really valuable thing because we don't need more picks on day, like on day 3, obviously. What I wouldn't mind is if you package some of the day 3 picks to come up to day 2. That's all right with me. But picking home runs on day 2 that's what's going to be really, really important in this draft. So I'd want them to stick and pick at 27. Or even if you got some offer of like ridiculous offer to go down to the second round and picked up two other on top of, like 3 day 2 picks, I'd be all over that. Because the parity, once you get past into the 20s in this draft, the parity at most positions is just so strong that you're apt to get, like at cornerback, there's so many good cornerbacks in this draft. Wide receiver, there's so many good wide receivers in this draft. And there's some sneaky good inside pass rushers, which is what we need. And that's what I'm hoping for at 27. if Jerzon Newton is there, even though he's got the foot problem, I think they can figure that out. If the medical people think they can do that, his inside pass rushing is tops in this draft, and I would hop on him immediately right there. If not, there's going to be one of the better corners sitting there, like Mike Sanders, still my favorite, best slot corner in the draft, in my opinion. We need two slot corners to take on Kupp and Nakua, Lockett and Najigba, Smith and Jigba, Debo and Ayuk, and McCaffrey when they, we need a guy to cover McCaffrey, who, in my opinion, is a top 10 slot receiver in the NFL when they put him out there. So anyway, but those corners there, the ones that really excite me would be Cooper DeJean. If he slid down to that spot and he's on the board, would love it. Nate Wiggins from Clemson, I think can be a real star in this league. I mean, he might be in that area that you can pick. And then at 35 too is I think Sanders might still be there. He's going to go high though because he's a 2-year captain at Michigan. I know a lot about him because he grew up in this area. Went to high school coached by a guy that I coached against, who's a legend in Massachusetts. He's at Everett when he coached at Everett. But there are going to be corners. TJ Tampa, I love that kid. There are other corners that I like later, big corners you can get later, like Kyrie Jackson on day 2, Cam Hart on day 2. There are a number of really, Elijah Jones from BC, who had 5 interceptions this year, who played really well. There are bigger corners you can get later, but I want to get after short slot. I want to get after slot corners. Renardo Green, remember that name, Florida State. That's a guy you could take. There are a lot of really good ones, so my preference would be, so in the top 3 picks, take the playmaker, because it's BPA at the top of the draft, but then get after this defense by adding an interior pass rusher. The edge guys I would stay away from. There are a couple flyers I like later on, like Brennan Jackson from Washington State, who I think you could get with the number 90 pick or the 104. I like him a lot. Losing my voice, sorry. And so first pick, playmaker. Second pick, cornerback or defensive pass rusher. Third pick, cornerback or defensive pass rusher. And then if you address that, then in that third round, if you had 4 picks, there's so many good guys. I mean, so many. I mean, Brandon Dorlus, I would take at 35. He's an inside pass rusher. He can, from Oregon, he can play 3 technique or 5 technique. He can do it all. I love that kid. Chris Jenkins from Michigan is a physical stud. He was part of that Michigan rotation that was so good. I mean, he'd be fantastic in that slot. Then you got, there are guys, the receivers. Malachi Corley I had drafted in my mock on Revenge of the Birds yesterday. Love that kid. He's like a Debo Samuel Jr. Just fantastic. If you could get your hands on him, I would love that. Xavier Leggett. I mean, the receivers are so plentiful in this draft. Getting one of them with 4 picks in round 3 would be huge. and someone's going to be there. I took Corley with the first one at 66. Then I nagged Dorless at 70. Kyrie Jack with the pick we got from the Giants. Kyrie Jackson, his teammate, the big corner at 71. And then I went with an edge, Braylon Trice. It was between him or Brandon Jackson. I chose Trice at 90, which would be really good value there. He's a developmental guy who's got some quick twitch to him. And then at 104, I picked Dadrion Taylor Demerson. We need a free safety over the top. We're getting burned there repeatedly for years. He's a guy who can do that. And I know the Cardinals are high on him. They've did the 30 visit with him. Then I went running back at 138 with Will Shipley. Do you know him, Kyle? Will Shipley? Clemson?
Yeah, I was going to say, is that the Clemson guy?
Yeah.
I'm adamantly familiar. I watched a couple Clemson games last year. I watched their game against Duke. I watched a couple of Clemson games, but yeah, the name was familiar, even if I'm not intimately familiar with his game.
Yeah. He's a tough kid and he runs well. He'd be great on special teams too. I would love adding him. Then at 162, Zach Zinter was on the board, the guard who got nicked up in the playoffs, or no, in the Ohio State game. Really like him. That would be a tremendous steal. He may still need some time to get back to full health, but at that point in the draft, it's awesome. And then lastly, I took Elijah Jones from Boston College. He was on, I think he'll go earlier than that, but so I added. So it ended up Odunze at 6, Jerzon Newton at 27, Mike Sainris still at 35, Malachi Corley at 66, Brandon Dorless at 70, Kyrie Jackson at 71, Braylon Trice at 90, Dadrion Taylor Demerson, the safety, at 104, Will Shipley at 136, Zach Zinter at 162, and Elijah Jones at 226. I gave up the 168 pick to the Giants because they needed some picks to seal that deal for us to move down 2 spots. That would be really exciting to me. But regardless, I'm coming into this draft. I want to keep an open mind. I want to, I really believe in fresh starts for everybody. And I don't try to jump ahead and see, with too high expectations. I try not to. I try to temper them. So, but I'm going to try to embrace this draft as best as I can. Kyle and I are going to come back at you on Friday after we know what happened in the first round with a second Red Rain this week. And then we'll come back on Monday after the whole draft is over and recap the whole thing for you guys. With that, I just want to thank Kyle. He's just so awesome to co-host this and produce it, and he's got such good football knowledge. Really appreciate his input. Want to thank all of you for the continued viewership or listenership or whatever you want to call it. You guys have been great. Our numbers are good, and it's all thanks to you. And I hope you enjoy the draft. I hope you're really excited about it. I hope your draft dreams come true, and we'll have time. We can all celebrate this together as the red rain showers down on you and me and all the Cardinal fans into a red sea. Red rain.